Okay, so my name is Tysen Henderson. I'm you may have known me from the art director panel that just happened. I worked on Bookworm Adventures with Jeff.
And I'm Jeff Weinstein. I don't have a microphone.
Here, use that one.
I'm Jeff Weinstein, and I'm a software engineer at PopCap Games.
For the Bookworm Adventures Post-Mortem, we kind of strayed a little bit away from the traditional 5 and 5 of 5 awesome points and 5 not so awesome points, and went with kind of a good, the not bad, and the ugly, dividing that to 3, spanned across production, art, and technology, which is nice because it's actually 1 less point. So we'll just go ahead and start with the good of design. Obviously, creating a fun game is a little bit of a fuzzy science, finding the OptiFun coefficient there. But one specific success that Bookworm Adventures had, I think, is the success in combining the genres that Bookworm Adventures comprises, which is casual word gameplay and sort of casual RPG, which RPG is generally a little bit more hardcore of a game. And to accomplish that, a lot of the streamlining as far as the fun elements of each had to be done, and kicking out even the complex fun ones had to be kicked out. So simplifying and streamlining, and then also kicking out the really hardcore parts of RPG. In that sense, we early on we removed the letter restriction, the letter connection restriction from the original Bookworm title, so that you had a field of letters that you could just pick from, and to bolster that. The obvious the component of making sure that the bigger and badder the word you spelled, the more positive feedback you got, the more you kicked butt, and both from a length of word sense, but also the difficulty of the letter, and even an esoteric sense, in the sense that the word just seems cool, so it better be cool when I actually spell it. And then as far as the RPG side, removing a lot of the hardcore stats that you might see on level up, even though we do have experience in level ups in an RPG sense. Removing a lot of the individual choice of forcing people to allocate minute stats, but then keeping the positive parts of RPG of having the in-game strategy choices of using potions to power up or to heal, as well as being able to collect your fat loot and then be able to select that as an equipment list going into individual levels and chapters. On top of that, the introduction of anything that was remotely complex, and also things that actually spanned both word and RPG, was introduced gradually and with a certain level of humor, and actually sort of disguised into the first levels as parts of the plot, so that we're not just brutally educating them with the finer points of the game, but actually kind of empowering them slowly. So we'll go to the not bad of design. We allotted half of the screen to the action of the game, where Lex the bookworm gets to beat the crap out of the denizens and monsters of mythology and different themes. So we wanted that to be pretty much action-packed. You want Lex to headbutt and to change into a fireball and kick the crap out of their monsters, and the monsters to return fire, to belch fireballs and to claw the crap out of you just at the same time. So we end up creating this web of complex interactions. You might light them on fire, or poison them, or freeze them. So there's tons and tons of combinations of animations that were necessary. And in generating some of those with a traditional film strip animation that we've used in the past in the bottom left, one monster ended up coming up to almost half a megabyte, which is just monstrous, gigantic. So if you think about it, if you do the math, if we want to do a lush world of a 12-hour adventure across 3 themed books, you're going to have a game that's billions of terabytes in size. So along came PAM animation, which is a proprietary thing. Where actually we it's kind of a combination of what you might find more familiar if you know of Macromedia Flash, and it's also sort of a marionetting system where individual parts of the monsters were split up, upper arm, lower arm, hands, things like that, such that each could be individually animated. We actually did use Macromedia Flash as a sequencer, and then we published out to Swift, and then after that, the proprietary tool takes over. And so you end up with little tiny chunks of art that are anywhere from like under a K to a couple K, and then a text file that describes all these complex animations, which was quite a success. And the not bad part of that, and why it's not in the great section, is as you sort of have the optimization rearing its ugly head, and you have these little parts, you tend to get the idea that you need to reuse these parts, and it's definitely you want a maximum efficiency, get the game, the final downloadable, under a manageable size, so it doesn't scare people away. And what you end up is a lot of reuse. You fight hundreds of wolves/dogs, you fight a bog serpent, a sea serpent, and a giant serpent, which is actually the same assets, so it's not any gianter than the bog serpent. And there's only so many enraged goats and sheep that you can fight before it starts becoming overly familiar. So that's a bad part of that. But in the end, like I said before, you end up with 150 monsters in a lavish environment with themes and some parallax backgrounds and a lot of fun effects, all under the 20 megabyte mark. Okay, so the ugly of design. There was definitely a certain level of nerd creep, which you might also want to call OMG RPG LOL, where all of us are hardcore gamers. I'm not sure that humor actually went across very well there. But a lot of us are also, while being casual game makers, developers, and casual game players, are also hardcore players, and we all played our share of RPGs. And so when creating this Bookworm Adventures game and having the opportunity to put in RPG elements, there was a little bit of a runaway desire to listen to that inner nerd in the mind of all of us, to actually put in as much little RPG stuff as we could. And one such example was gold. Gold was a secondary commodity in the reward system that was originally designed for something that could drop off all the monsters. You'd gather it, much like in hardcore role-playing games, as to reward anything from combo play or to overkilling a monster by spelling a large word right when they were about to die, which we ended up solving in a much better way later. But that opens up a can of worms. Now you have a commodity, which is actually a currency. So now do you have to spend it? Now do you have to have a store? Now you have to do all these different things that really just add complexity. And they don't actually, in the end, once we took it out, the game became a lot more simple, a lot more fun. And the complexity for complexity's sake, even though it's kind of a cliche that you learn right off the bat, kind of fell in that trap a little bit in the beginning there. And you end up with things like the nerd cleave, which basically alienates your audience when you're trying to engage both casual players and maybe a couple hybrid players that play casual games and hardcore games. You don't want to have all the hardcore RPG stuff in there. So let's get back to the good. The good of production. Not to toot our own horns, but you can't stress enough the importance of a really strong team and a really conducive culture to being creative and to being open to each other's ideas and vision. Everyone on the team were basically best friends, basically like really good at communicating to one another. Even the vague concepts wasn't a lot of work to actually tell each other what was going on or what sort of minor tweaks we wanted. You just say, would it be better if it was kind of like, and then it would actually translate into actual real changes in the game. At the same time, being able to have a team of hybrids, and not so much to have a little bit of an inkling of knowledge in more than one discipline, but actually underneath each of our hats having the ability to perform multiple tasks at the same time and understand the disciplines and understand the requisites of each of the tasks from a different standpoint while creating the game. And on top of that, the support team that we had around us was at PopCap was great. The culture is one of open suggestions and feedback, and always listening to all that sort of thing, because you never know who's going to give you that next great idea or the solution to that problem that you've been banging your head against the wall for a while. And at the same time, it's a very trusting environment. They're only in there as much to help you out and leave you be and not put their thumbs in the pie at all times, which is nice. And on top of that, our QA testing group is they're not bug smushers. They're not there to exterminate. They actually have a game design sense of their own, and they're giving feedback and a kind of ideas late in the game that really actually made a difference, and they actually do assure quality, which is definitely a boon. The not bad at production. Here's a sort of a list of all the reusable parts, not all, but some of them that were used. So I'll get into the not bad as the proprietary tools that were used in production. obviously they made the game possible, being able to use animations to quickly prototype and animate and tweak each and every monster. We used it for effects, we used it for the parallaxing backgrounds, we used it for a lot of different things that increased the rapidity of being able to actually develop these environments and the assets. We also used Lua scripting language, allowing for a number of accelerations in the production of the game itself, which I'll get into more later. But what you get when you're having proprietary tools in a game, which is, of course, is that you're going to be developing a massive game and trying to make it the best you can, and trying to pay attention to all the details. But at the same time, you're also developing tools. So having those two things happen simultaneously can be a bit of a horror, and it might attribute to some mental scarring at times. And sometimes you're not sure, if it's a user error or is it the tool error, because it's a new tool. You're not sure if you're familiar with this tool at all, or there's something that actually changed with the tool itself. But at the same time, without these tools, no Bookworm Adventures. And the ugly of production, at one point, looking at the development, the dev folder, and just seeing the sheer size, the sheer whale of a game that this was. There was a pretty massive scope, a really ambitious scope as well. And due to the complexity and due to the combination of gameplay, it ended up being quite massive. And that was something that was definitely reeled in all along the way. The game was a lot bigger. As far as the vision goes, we had big eyes and a small core team to actually to realize the vision, which brings us to the $700,000 question, which is something that might be on some of your minds. How could a casual game cost $700,000? The hard answer, I guess, is the entire Post-Mortem. You can take all those points to heart. And the easy answer, if for example, you could divide the $700,000 by the 4 core members across 2.5 years, and you come to a more reasonable number of $70,000 per member per year, which is not something to scoff at, but doesn't take into account outsourced musical score, musical team, the sound effects people, all the different QA, all the different people that helped us out along the way, and all the process that's involved in releasing the game, testing the game, all that sort of thing, all figures into that cost. And so I guess the takeaway of that is that it did take quite a while for the core team to create it, but at the same time, that's what it took to create Bookworm Adventures. So the next section is technology, which I will let Jeff talk about, because I'm sort of dumb in that sort of sense.
So I'll get into the technology here, and I'm also going to do the good, the not bad, and the kind of crappy. So let's start with the good stuff at first. We obviously based this using our own PopCap framework, which is extremely robust. We've been using it since the company's inception, and it's basically powered every one of our titles, so we don't have to worry about things like bizarre, weird driver conflict issues, or what if the user alt-enters, switches the screen resolution, alt-tabs back, switches to 2D mode. Like, well, who cares? We already know what happens. It's tested. So one of the cool things about the framework is, since you don't have to worry about a lot of the boring stuff, you actually just jump right into the game development, and it allows for some pretty rapid prototyping. Fortunately, it's a little bit too rapid sometimes. When I get to work on a game, it's all basically done with rectangles, which is cool for me because I can jump right in, but everyone else hates me for it. So one of the other cool things is we used Lua, a pretty heavily modified version of Lua for this, and we optimized the crap out of the language. We improved the garbage collection time substantially. We implemented a pooled memory manager to ease a lot of the time taken up by making temporary variables, making temporary tables, and the lookup times associated with them. And probably one of the cooler things that we did was 2 of the guys on the team made an integrated debugger for Visual Studio for it that worked almost exactly identical to the Visual Studio's C++ debugger. Could do everything from setting conditional breakpoints, looking at, walking up a stack, evaluating expressions inline in there, and it allowed for some extremely rapid debugging, which would have just been a real pain in the butt if we didn't have a solution like that. And probably one of the other nice things too is just that by using the Lua and the C++ in tandem, it basically allowed us to separate out a lot of the things that we're going to need to be worked on by non-programmers, such as all the monster AI, all the balancing and all that stuff. And that allowed people like Tysen and some of the other guys on the team to be able to actually jump in, write the AI, do some of the balancing without having to have me at all times writing the code and implementing everything. So it made things go a little smoother. So next I'll get to the not bad, which sometimes winds up being bad, but sometimes good. So as Tyson kind of hinted at, we had a lot of new technology in this. We had the whole PAM animation stuff. We had the Lua, and we had this new packed file format that we use to sort of prevent asset ripping. And those are all really cool, and they helped out a lot, but the downside was that this stuff was pretty much in development while we were developing the game. And so not only are you trying to write this extremely large and complex title, but at the same time, you're basically trying to debug and ensure the stability of all your supporting tools. And when some of those don't work, it's kind of like, well, okay, is the problem on the tool end, or now is the problem on the logic end, or maybe, heaven forbid, it's both. And so we wound up actually fixing a lot of stuff pretty much up until launch date within all our tools. Which also basically means that, increased time to QA, because now it's like, we take our stable, solid framework and we add on to that untested, unproven stuff, which we feel like is helping us out, and it really is. But, our QA team then gets really nervous and goes, oh, well, we've never done anything with Lua before. We got to test this on as many machines as possible and look for all sorts of possible crashes and weirdnesses. So it really does increase the amount of time that it takes to develop the project. And lastly, we have a QA team in Dublin as well. And so one of the things that wound up kind of being a little problematic was obviously they're plus 8 hours and we're minus 8 from them. So the communication time was kind of an issue. So on to the ugly. This is a frequently encountered error that we would tend to get in the development of the game. And basically all this technology had a lot of pitfalls. Admittedly, a lot of it was kind of stupid stuff on our end. When it came to the Lua language, we wanted to make it so much like C++ because we totally hated the random different for the sake of different syntax, that we actually switched the array indexing to be zero-based instead of one-based, which was great because I was getting off by 1 errors up until 6 months before launch time. I wanted to kill myself. The other thing, too, was we had Vista all of a sudden was just like, hey, I'm here, deal with me. And we're like, oh, crap. So we had to deal with Vista compliance, which at first, like, what's the big deal? It's just another operating system. And then you sit down and you're like, Jesus, this is huge. So that wound up taking a lot of time. And then once we started wrapping the game with our DRM, the DRM itself was evolving as well, too. So, and then on top of that, the DRM had to be tested on Vista, and all sorts of stuff like that. And then we had multiple sort of marketing modes and trials for the game. So not only did we have the game, but now we have to deal with the DRM, these 4 different random modes of locking a user out. And it just kind of adds up to a lot of hassle. So, but in the end, it all worked out well. It's just kind of a pain to get there.
And just to close, there definitely was a happy ending. Bookworm Adventures was finally realized and shipped out the door late last year, before the holidays, before we all collectively committed suicide. But to a success in the market, we had some record sales numbers on PopCap for the first 45 days, and a lot of people, all of our peers, obviously also enjoying the game a lot. So in the end, I think the lesson learned was that luckily all of our good and our not bad points definitely outweighed our ugly points that you might have seen in the post-mortem. So yeah, that concludes the content that we have for you. If you want to actually check out the game and you haven't, go ahead and check it out on popcap.com. And if you are more interested or just interested about the PopCap framework itself, go ahead and check it out on developer.popcap.com.
If anybody has any questions, go ahead and ask them. We'll try to answer them.
Yeah, we got a couple of questions. Go ahead.
Hey, how are you guys feeling about the 1.5 million game?
What's that?
How are you feeling about doing upcoming $1.5 million games?
Yeah, I'm going to shy away from even a $700,000 game for a while. And do something a little simpler for a while. This is just a monster of a game. So, and,
do you think it was a good bet, or spending that much time and money?
I don't think the number itself is what was the important point. I think a lot of the hassles would have existed either way if the team was larger and it was faster, and maybe the number would have been lower. Whatever would have solved that number. I think a lot of the hassles were were more related to developing the game itself and not the budget that was involved. I mean, I didn't even know the number until the PR press release came out. And I was like, oh, really? Wow.
I think the thing you'll find about the dollar cost was, like we've mentioned, all that new technology contributed pretty heavily to the length of time. So now that we have this stuff done, hopefully in a sequel or whatever, it won't take 2.5 years, because that'd be ridiculous. Yep.
Sure.
I was wondering if during that 2.5 years there was any phase that was that you could say clearly was kind of a prototyping experimental phase, and then if there was a clear production, okay, we know exactly what we're making, let's run to the finish line phase, and what those sizes were.
I think there's a lot of freedom to put in new features and add new design sort of elements all the way through the end, but I would have to say yes. There was, as you would expect, the first third or so, there was a lot of concepting, and there was a lot of building out just the first monster encounter, just Flex versus one monster, and then adding features and onions getting out from there. And then when we got to a certain point where the first entire book of the 3 books was set down, and we really liked how it played, we liked how all the mechanics were introduced, and the final mechanic at the end of the book played, and we thought that was extremely fun. It's really just, at that point, really content grind at that point. We did add more gameplay and new tiles and new attacks through the last 2 books, but the last two-thirds, maybe last half, was really pumping out all the necessary art and mini games and AI and level tuning and balancing to finish out those last 2 books.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of questions for you guys, actually, about your prevention of asset ripping and your DRM time spent and money spent on that. Whose mandate was that, and is that a thing that you have to go forward with all these new games, and why were you so tight about that? Was it such a big deal that a 12-year-old would rip off your worm and throw him on a website?
Yeah, no. Part of the mandate was mostly from our boss, Brian, who gets really giddy about new technology, and he goes, hey, guess what? I have new technology you get to implement. It's like, all right, thanks. You get suckered into it because he's really charismatic. You're like, yeah, that is really cool. I totally want to do that. And it sounds reasonable. Path file format, right? You don't want people taking your stuff. Okay, fine, let's toss that in. It wasn't that, putting everything into a file is a big deal. It was more of just like, we kept doing all sorts of random, weird, bizarre file accessing stuff. There was kind of the thing where it was like, I'd get this thing from Brian, and then it'd be like, oops, it doesn't quite do this, and it causes these very weird, strange bugs now. And it was more like just trying to track stuff down, because that didn't come in until about probably about 6 months before launch as well. So anytime you have basically a stable product, well, close enough to stable, and then you all of a sudden toss in something new and big, it's never simple. And then on the DRM front, there was just a lot of issues that we had to deal with Vista, everything from, making sure things go on the right path to, obviously then saying like, oops, we don't want to obviously have these protected files plainly visible to the users, so they can just go in and edit the registration info. And part of that too was just us learning to use Vista. We had a beta copy of Vista. We had machines that did not have compatible drivers, and sometimes just like, is it the machine's fault? Is it Vista's fault? Is it our fault? And it doesn't matter. You have to fix it regardless.
Okay, thank you. Question 2. You used the 30-month development time, I don't know if you did, but somebody did, as a sort of a selling point for the game. And from my perspective, having developed games like these, 30 months on a casual game isn't necessarily a great thing, you know what I mean? And I don't know if that's how the audience perceived it, but do you feel that was a good advertising technique, or?
It's an advertising technique. Obviously, I as the programmer. Oh, go ahead, James.
Let him answer that.
It's James. Hi, James.
I would definitely draw a distinction between advertising versus publicity, right? We would never advertise the game that way to end users, but it was an effective publicity ploy in the sense that it got the game lots of press. And getting it lots of press means you get it in articles placed in all sorts of, big name newspapers. And so the PR guys are always looking for what's the angle to get the PR. And in this particular case, they were like, wow, this is the biggest game ever made. That is a negative. How do we turn it into a positive? Well, biggest game ever, right? Or something. And so it did get lots of PR. And I would say that did drive a lot of traffic to the game in its initial weeks that might not others have gotten. Ultimately, like any game in the casual game space, we depend on users enjoying it to ultimately sell the game, right? Get it in someone's hands. If they like it, they'll tell their friends, and they'll go and download their own copy. And so no amount of PR is going to help a bad game succeed, but it absolutely can give kind of extra early boost. And in today's competitive market, that early boost is ever more important because it helps get the game kind of up and off the ground.
If I can push my luck and just ask a third question, then I'll be done totally.
Go ahead.
I came to the game through a site called Penny Arcade that a bunch of you probably read, because Tycho gave a big plug to it. I don't know if that was some strings pulled, but anyway, he was going on and on and on about the features where you could use a synonym for, say, fire and create a fire potion, right? So I thought, that sounded awesome. And I went and I played the game. We were talking about that first hour earlier. I'm not too sure if it's because I got up and had a bathroom break, but I didn't see that feature at all in my first hour of playing, and that's what I was really gunning for. And it was just sort of a linear railroading through monster after monster. It was, and I might be wrong about that, but was it up front, or did you really bury that stuff later on?
The sort of gist of the thing is the game has a huge number of really complex issues, and we did not want to overwhelm the users with all this stuff right at once. So, for example, you've got, and again, remember that you have casual gamers who have no idea what XP is. So you got an XP bar, you've got potions, you've got all these treasures, which mostly have passive effects, but some of them have active effects. And then you have all these indicators. The bottom right has all this lore about the monsters, tells you their weaknesses, their strengths. It's a lot of information. So what we did is basically over the first 6 chapters, all the concepts, 7 chapters? Over the first 7 chapters, I apparently don't know the game. All the concepts are really slowly revealed to the user interface, as well as concepts, whatever. You don't even get the special gem tiles, which do a lot of the cool effects, until chapter 6, and it's basically a slow ramp. And we did that mostly just to make sure that the casual gamers wouldn't get alienated and confused and freaked out. You do get a lot of these different treasures that do different things. The fire synonym thing, though, it's a little bit later on. But you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, sure. On top of that, we're running out of time, is that what you're saying?
We're running out of time, so let's do the last couple of questions real quick.
We can talk to you afterwards if you want.
Yeah, ask some questions. There's a lot of reasons why.
I had one question. The development time of 30 months, I want to know how much that actually, do you think that assisted? Because I think a team of 4 over 30 months, for 700,000 is very different than a team of 10 for, 10 months. And if the iterative process in that time frame actually assisted, and how you feel about the keeping a very small development team that works for longer versus a larger team for a shorter period of time.
Well, there's a certain amount of power that you get from having small, tight teams that are constantly working together. I mean, there's an individual idea might not just sit on the pot for a while. It's actually going to be acted upon and rapidly prototyped and put in the game, taken out of the game, tweaked. And so there's a lot of agility there in having the small team. In PopCap, all of our teams are actually quite small. And generally, also the games are quite small, but in this case, the game is gigantic. I think that I don't think we lost anything. I think as far as having the small team, it was like I said, the agility and the ability to rapidly build the game. Maybe some content developers on the back end might have been a good suggestion to expand that team. Once we got to the content grind that I was talking about earlier, might have been advisable. But overall, good small teams, tight teams are a good thing, I think.
Next.
Yeah, hi. Was there a budget for this game when you guys started? And the other part is, what was the sentiment internally as you guys were doing sort of a real-time accumulation of these costs, and whose head was rolling as a result of it?
There wasn't an exact budget per se. There wasn't a front end that or even a tight, like, we want this game done by Q4 2006.
We were actually late, I think, quite a bit. I think I once was like, this is totally sweet. We'll get this done by September. And then it was a year from September that we were just like, okay, we're close.
And we have the luxury of being able to kind of take the pure quality sort of standpoint and being able to, when the game's done, it's done. Obviously, there's to an extreme where people start getting nervous and start poking at you, like, well, what are you doing next? What's the next feature? Are you done? And do you have any ideas? What's your estimate? But in the end, it was really all about like making the best game possible, despite the costs and the schedule.
So there was no budget?
No exact budget per se, no.
we never set a budget for our stuff. So if anybody wants to ask questions later, they're happy to walk up to us at the end.
Yeah, we'll be in DC all week.
Yeah. All right, thanks, folks. We're breaking for lunch. 2 o'clock, be back for 6 Degrees of Ricochet.